Hi, Mr. Loomis. Welcome back for our fourth and final lesson about the 1930s, specifically about the New Deal, which was President Franklin Roosevelt's plan to end the Great Depression. In our last lesson, we talked about the first 100 days of FDR's presidency and the programs he launched to deal with the immediate problems facing Americans. Today, we're going to talk more about the things he did later on as he tried to fix some of the bigger long-term problems facing the country. Before we launch into our story, let's get a rundown of our topics. We'll start with a popular, successful program called the TVA that is very much still a part of life for many Americans who live in and around the state of Tennessee. As you've learned in our past units, workers wanted to get a better life by forming unions. Helping unions was a big part of the New Deal. Social Security, a very popular program that is still important today, was part of the New Deal, and we'll learn about its creation. Then we'll take some time to talk about the people who didn't like the New Deal, as well as one of FDR's biggest mistakes, an event known as court packing. Finally, we'll close by looking at the overall impact of the New Deal, especially assessing how much it helped minorities such as African Americans and women, and if the New Deal actually ended the Depression or not. Let's get started with the Tennessee Valley Authority. Many of the New Deal projects tried to fix problems in just one part of the country. The most famous of these projects was the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA. The TVA worked on flood control, reforestation, and hydroelectric power in the area around the Tennessee River. They gave jobs to more than 1,000 Americans on a project that Roosevelt saw as a model for other government projects in the future. Led by David Lilienthal, the TVA workers built dams to use the Tennessee River to make hydroelectric power. Electric lighting and machinery made the lives of people who lived in the area easier, and it also encouraged more people to start businesses. The TVA didn't just build dams, they also tried to teach farmers important lessons about crop rotation, soil replenishment, fertilization, and reforestation. Not everyone liked the TVA. Most of all, the 15,000 people who were forced to leave their homes to make way for the building of the new dams. At first, many people didn't trust the government and the TVA leaders. As with several other New Deal programs, women didn't get hired for any of the new jobs that were needed. Most Americans still thought that men should be the person in the family to earn money. However, after the dams were built and people started to get electricity, they started to change their minds. New businesses like textile mills that made clothing opened, and some of these offered jobs to women. Throughout his presidency, Roosevelt often pointed to the TVA as one of the best parts of the New Deal. It brought together the government, along with private businesses, to help the economy around the dams. Just months before his death in 1945, he gave a speech about trying to copy the TVA idea all over the country. Let's shift now to a story that's familiar to you from our previous units, labor unions. For years, labor unions have been trying to protect their members. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, most labor strikes had ended when the government came in on the side of the owners. The New Deal changed that. For the first time in America's history, the government passed laws to protect and support labor unions. The National Recovery Administration was central to this plan. It said that businesses had to accept regulation and laws that included minimum wages and maximum work hours. To protect workers, the NRA set up a code of fair practice for every industry. These codes said that workers had the right to organize unions and use collective bargaining to make sure that pay went up when prices went up. Headed by General Hugh Johnson, the NRA worked to make over 500 different codes for different industries. A complicated program like the NRA created its own problems. While codes for some industries, such as car makers and steel factories, made sense, Johnson pushed to create codes for dog food manufacturers and even entertainment, such as regulating the number of dancers in any one show. One unintended result of the NRA was that the rule that said workers could be part of a union sounded to some people like a rule that said workers had to be in a union. In industries that had never seen unions before, such as oil or rubber, workers tried to get help from groups that would help them form unions. The Communist Party used this chance to help in the hope of getting people to like them. The number of strikes, when workers refused to work, doubled between 1932 and 1934, with over 1.5 million workers going out on strike in 1934 alone. Many of these strikes ended when workers died in fighting with the police or with replacement workers. These fights show the problem with FDR's ideas. His plans to fix short-term problems did not fix bigger long-term problems like differences between the rich and poor, and problems many workers face like low pay, long hours, and little protection. For many workers, life at work was not much better than life without a job. New Deal programs may have put men back to work and given them help, but the problems in the system needed to be fixed. To help workers, Roosevelt signed into law the Wagner Act, also called the National Labor Relations Act. This law created the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, which protected American workers' right to unionize and bargain collectively. The NLRB also gave workers a way to complain about problems they were having with owners. Although Republicans and factory owners did not like it, the Supreme Court decided that the Wagner Act was constitutional in 1937. John L. Lewis and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO, who had wanted a law to protect the rights of workers and unions, celebrated the passage of the Wagner Act. The connection between FDR and the Wagner Act helped both Roosevelt and Lewis's United Mine Workers Union in the 1936 elections, as union workers rewarded the president with their votes. The signing of the Wagner Act was the beginning of many years of support for Democratic candidates by union workers. Now it's time to talk about the program that probably has had the biggest impact on America, Social Security. In the early days of our country, most people were farmers. But in the 1800s, people started to work on jobs where they got paid by someone else. And the question of retirement became important. Who should pay retired workers? At what age was retirement reasonable? In the beginning, people were expected to save a little of each paycheck for the day they would retire. The idea of a pension, which is money paid by companies to retired workers, was not common. Unfortunately, most working Americans lived paycheck to paycheck with little or nothing extra to be saved for the future, and many workers had to pay for their family members who were retired. The Social Security Act of 1935 tried to fix this problem. Many countries in Europe tried to start pension plans. Britain and Germany had some success. Roosevelt decided that the American pension plan, called Social Security, would be a contract between generations. The current generation of workers would pay a little each month in a tax that the government would give to older people who were retired. When a person turned 65, he or she would start getting a check each month from the government. In this way, Social Security works as a way to share money between younger and older Americans. Taking from working Americans and giving to older people is how American Social Security works. Roosevelt knew that once Social Security became a law, it would always be a part of American life. He guessed that once workers had paid into a system for years, they would expect to receive their money. No politician would ever dare to end the system once it was in place. He was correct. Social Security is still one of the most popular and most expensive things the federal government does for the people. A team led by Secretary of Labor Frances Perkins, the first female to hold a cabinet position, wrote the Social Security Act. In addition to providing for retirees, unemployment insurance was part of the plan. The federal government offered to match money the states paid for the blind and job training for the physically disabled. Unmarried women with children also received money under the Social Security Act. However, by far the largest number of people who got money because of the law were America's retirees. Roosevelt and his team knew that the Social Security Act was not perfect. Like other new ideas, he hoped the law would be the start for a system that could be improved over time. In the beginning, retirees only got a small amount of money. Still, Roosevelt knew the plan was a big change. For the first time, the federal government took on the job of helping older people in need. We spent a lot of time talking about all the good things that FDR did and how his New Deal program solved lots of problems. But we should note that not everyone liked his ideas. Let's take a look at some of the people who worked against him and why. Business owners and rich Americans were one group of critics. Many of them said that FDR was moving away from important American values, independence, self-reliance. Many conservative Republicans agreed with him, including the former president, Herbert Hoover. Even a few conservative Democrats said that some of Roosevelt's New Deal programs were anti-American. The most clear critic of the New Deal was Senator Robert Taft, son of former President William Howard Taft. Taft, like Hoover, thought that the government needed to let private businesses fix the economy instead of the government. He said the New Deal was socialist and thought that the government was spending too much money. He also did not like the National Labor Relations Board or Social Security. Taft never won his argument, but for many years he served in the Senate and always made strong conservative arguments against FDR's plans. Other people thought that Roosevelt had not done enough. Francis E. Townsend of California was one who felt that Roosevelt had failed to deal with the country's biggest problems. Townsend, who was a retired dentist, wanted a huge pension plan for the elderly. The Townsend Plan, as it was known, was popular with many Americans. The Townsend Plan said the government should give every retired person $200 each month as long as they spent it in 30 days. Townsend and his followers thought that the money would help the economy. Another person who became famous was Father Charles Coughlin. He was a radio priest who liked the New Deal in the beginning. But later he said that the president's plan didn't do enough. He used his weekly radio shows to get followers. In the end, Coughlin lost his audience when he began saying anti-Semitic things and said that America should support Adolf Hitler in Germany. The biggest critic of the president was the corrupt but beloved Louisiana Senator Huey Kingfish Long. Partly, he did not like FDR because he also wanted to be president himself. But Long also said that the president was not doing enough to help people. He proposed his own Share Our Wealth program. Under this plan, Long wanted to take all the money away from the rich and give it to poor Americans. He wanted to give $5,000 to every family, $2,500 to every worker, as well as give extra money to retired people and students. Long was an outstanding speaker, and like the president, was able to explain complicated ideas in easy-to-understand language. Long's ideas probably would not have worked, but he had many followers. If he'd not been killed, he might have run against Roosevelt in the 1936 presidential election. Now let's talk about FDR's biggest political mistake. It all started with the Supreme Court. As you know, the Supreme Court is the final decision maker when there are disagreements in our country, especially about whether or not laws break the Constitution. In 1935, the Supreme Court decided that the AAA, WPA, NRA, and both federal and state minimum wage laws were unconstitutional. In the opinion of the court, Roosevelt had gone too far. The Constitution, the court said, did not give the federal government the power to set prices or say how much workers should be paid. Roosevelt was not happy with the court's decision. Despite criticism of his ideas and being hurt in court, Roosevelt was still popular in 1936, and he beat the Republican candidate Alf Landon in the presidential election by an electoral college vote of 523 to 8. FDR thought it was his moment of strongest public support, and he chose to fight back against the Supreme Court. Roosevelt's plan was nicknamed court packing. Ever since the earliest days of the country, the Supreme Court has always had 9 members. But the Constitution doesn't actually say how many justices there should be. Roosevelt wanted to add new justices who liked his ideas. He planned to add 1 justice for every current justice over the age of 70 who refused to step down. This would have allowed him to add 6 more justices. Since the Constitution does not say what the size of the Supreme Court should be, this was legal. But President Roosevelt was playing a dangerous political game. The court has always been a separate branch of government, limiting the power of both Congress and the president. If Roosevelt could change who was on the Supreme Court, he would have control over their decisions. Both the Supreme Court and Congress quickly said they did not like FDR's new idea. including people from his own party. Roosevelt's plan never happened. The retirement of Justice Van Deventer, as well as the sudden death of Senator Joe T. Robinson, who had promoted Roosevelt's plan in the Senate, put a stop to Court Packet. In the end, Roosevelt might have scared the justices into supporting his new programs, and they upheld both the Wagner Act and Social Security. Never again during his presidency would the Supreme Court strike down any important parts of his New Deal. However, Roosevelt suffered politically, and that Americans became more suspicious of his ideas and more cautious how much power the president has. As we close out our study of the New Deal, we should take a minute to consider some of the problems in America that FDR didn't try to fix. Most of all, African Americans were left out of much of the New Deal programs. In FDR's job programs such as the CCC, CWA, and WPA, African Americans often didn't get jobs. The AAA did not help tenant farmers and sharecroppers, many of whom were African Americans. In the beginning, even Social Security did not include maids and servants, which were jobs done by many African American women. Over time, Roosevelt did try to fix some of these problems. By 1935, things were getting better. In the end, about 15% of all WPA workers were African American. By the time the CCC ended in 1938, the percentage of its African American workers had gone from 3% to nearly 11%. In 1934, the PWA began to require that all government projects hire African Americans, using a quota that matched the percentage of the local population. Additionally, one New Deal program, the Federal One Project, helped over 1 million African American children learn to read and write. Roosevelt had mixed success in helping race relations. Within his White House, Roosevelt gave jobs to some African Americans, although most were in minor positions. Unofficially, Roosevelt asked for advice from the Federal Council on Negro Affairs, better known by its nickname, the Black Cabinet. One key member of the Black Cabinet was Mary McLeod Bethune, a leading African American educator who had helped found Bethune-Cookman University. With this job, she became one of the president's most important African American advisors. During his presidency, Roosevelt became the first to appoint an African American federal judge, as well as the first commander-in-chief to make an African American a brigadier general. Most importantly, he became the first president to speak out against lynching. Even though he did do some things to help African Americans, Roosevelt also knew he was limited. To make sure he had enough people supporting his ideas, Roosevelt did not want to make white Southern Democrats angry with him. While he talked about how there should be laws against lynching, he never pushed Congress to vote for one. Also, even though the federal government made changes to make sure to give jobs to African Americans, few changes were made by state or city governments, and African Americans were usually at the back of the unemployment lines. Even though there were only some changes, Roosevelt should get credit for seeing how important civil rights were. More than any other president since the Civil War, Roosevelt knew how important the federal government could be in supporting civil rights, and how much he could help support a new group of young civil rights leaders. Roosevelt was also able to work with Congress to improve the lives of Native Americans. In 1934, he signed into law the Indian Reorganization Act, which is better known as the Indian New Deal. Since the end of the Indian Wars in the late 1800s, the government had been forcing Native Americans to learn and live by white culture. Roosevelt's Indian New Deal helped them start local self-government and preserve their culture. John Collier, the commissioner on the Indian Bureau of Affairs from 1933 to 1945, fought for this new law and saw it as an opportunity to correct the bad things the government had done to Native Americans in the past. Even though it was hard work and did not fix all the problems, Collier's plans helped give land back to Native Americans and protected Native American cultures. For women, the New Deal only helped a little. In government jobs, women were hardly ever paid as much as men, and New Deal programs tried to get women to stay home and leave jobs open for men. And this was normal at that time in history. The WPA became the first New Deal agency to hire women, but the chance to get a job was only for widows, single women, and the wives of disabled husbands. While they did not take part in construction projects, women did join sewing projects to make blankets and clothing for hospital and relief agencies. Also, several women took part in art projects. Even though they did not have all the same chances as men, many women liked Roosevelt's New Deal. They liked the new chances they had to have jobs, but they also liked the New Deal because of the jobs men in their families could get. One such woman was Mary or Molly Dewson, an activist in the women's suffrage movement. Dewson and Mary McLeod Bethune knew things were hard for everyone, so it was not a good time to get people to support new rights for women. Rather than being mad about what Roosevelt could or could not or would not do, they felt that Roosevelt would do more than most other people to help women and African Americans have a place or piece of this new America that he was building. Among the few but important women who directly changed Roosevelt's ideas was Frances Perkins, who as Secretary of Labor was the first woman member of any presidential cabinet, and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a strong and public supporter for social causes. Perkins, one of only two original cabinet members to stay with Roosevelt for his entire presidency, helped with the CCC, PWA, NRA, and the Social Security Act. However, Eleanor Roosevelt, more so than any other person, had the most influence on the president. She had always supported her husband in all of his elections, and she used her position to fight for several changes for women, African Americans, and the poor in the countryside. When she discovered letters that showed her husband had an affair, the marriage became less about love and more of a political partnership. Historians agree that the First Lady was smart about using her position to fight for things she cared about. Sometimes she spoke up about things FDR could not. From newspaper and magazine articles she wrote to a busy travel schedule that saw her regularly cross the country, the First Lady tried to remind Americans that their problems were important to the people working in the White House. Eleanor Roosevelt saw racial problems while she traveled, and she tried to get FDR to make changes to help African Americans. In 1934, she gave speeches about the anti-lynching bill that the president liked but could not fight for in public without angering Southern white leaders he needed to support him. Breaking with tradition, the First Lady often invited African American leaders to eat with her and the president. Most famous was when the Daughters of the American Revolution, or DAR, refused to let the famous black opera contralto Marian Anderson sing in Constitution Hall, their theater. Eleanor quit the DAR and arranged for Anderson to sing at a public concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, followed by a dinner at the White House. When it came to race relations, Eleanor Roosevelt was able to do what her husband, for political reasons, could not, and she became the White House's public voice for civil rights. No final look at the New Deal is complete without thinking about Roosevelt himself. He was a leader like no other. Hard times called for new ideas, and FDR had new ideas that just might have saved the capitalist system and perhaps the American democracy. During the Depression, some countries in Europe turned to fascism, communism, dictatorship, and in the end, they all failed. FDR's New Deal didn't change the basic ideas America was built on. People still had choices about where to work, what to buy, and who they voted for. The government never took over businesses, and the social safety net created by Social Security was not as big as the programs created in Europe. He did things to keep liberals happy, but not so much that he changed the basic way America works. FDR believed things would work out, and he made other people think so also. His ability to use radio showed other presidents how important it is to communicate with people. On the other hand, people who think FDR was not a good president say he tried to take too much power and showed future presidents that they can usually get away with things they should not. The New Deal created millions of jobs all over the country. Federal protection of money in banks ended bank runs. Bad acting by people buying and selling stocks was mostly stopped. The Social Security system is still one of the most popular government programs ever. For the first time in peacetime history, the government started to take care of the economy and protect the basic welfare of all people. The lives of workers got better and their unions got stronger. But life was not better for everyone. FDR didn't try his hardest to improve civil rights or women's rights. And however big the New Deal seemed, it did not meet its main goal, ending the Depression. In 1939, 19% of people still could not get a job. In the end, it was all the money the government spent on World War II and the jobs the war created that ended the Depression, not Roosevelt's New Deal. Conservatives did not like it that the New Deal created over 1 million government jobs. They said that Roosevelt more than doubled the national debt in 8 short years. Some liberals also did not like the New Deal. They said that the difference between the rich and the poor barely changed. Even though it was not perfect, Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal helped America get through dark times and still be strong enough to take on the even greater job of the 1940s, winning a war against Hitler's Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. That concludes our study of the Great Depression and the New Deal. As we finish, let's recap our big ideas. FDR supported unions with the Wagner Act. It was the first time that the government made a law to help workers in their struggle with company owners. Social Security is the most important program to come out of the New Deal. It provides benefits for retired Americans. The money is taken from working younger people and redistributed to the elderly. Not everyone liked the New Deal. Some liberals thought it did not do enough to take money away from the rich and give it to the poor. Republicans thought that the New Deal's programs would end up hurting America in the end by taking away people's independence and motivation to take care of themselves. When the Supreme Court ruled that many of the New Deal programs were unconstitutional, FDR tried to add justices to the court, but was blocked by Congress, which correctly saw it as an attempt by the president to control the court. Minorities such as Native Americans, African Americans, and women were helped in limited ways by the New Deal. But giving jobs to men was the main goal of the New Deal, so civil rights and women's rights were not FDR's priority. However, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt especially championed civil rights and women's rights while her husband was in office. Ultimately, the New Deal did not end the Great Depression, but it helped. It also gave the federal government more power and gave Americans the idea that it was the job of their government to look out for the people and protect them from economic hardship. Thank you for sticking with me all the way through. As you prepare for your test, make sure to review the Quizlet set so you can remember all the alphabet soup of New Deal programs, and review with the study guide so you can keep all the stories you've learned fresh in your mind. Good luck. I'll see you next time. We'll be learning about how President Roosevelt led America through World War II. Until then, take care and study hard.
I had to pack up and go, and I just blowed in, and I'll soon blow out again.